Welcome to Symfony Workshop. I'm Gary Clarke, and this is the first recording in a mini project which is going to be focused around consuming an API with the HTTP client and also on test-driven development using Symfony's excellent testing tools. In this first one, we're going to get set up with a lightweight in-memory test database, which is so easy to set up. I'm sure you're going to love it. And we'll write our first test using TDD. We're going to follow that up by using the HTTP client to ping an API, and we'll get a response and play around with the response data. Some information before we start. I record in high resolution, so there's no need to watch on a blurry screen. Choose high definition if that works for you. Would you like to join a growing group of PHP developers and take your skills to a new level? If that sounds like you, all you need to do is subscribe and click the little notification icon, and welcome to the family. This is the platform we're going to use. This is Rapid API, which is an excellent platform for developers to test out all different kinds of APIs. And the one we're going to use is Yahoo Finance. So we're going to ping the API, which we'll do using the HTTP client. We're going to grab the details for a particular stock. In our case, we'll use Amazon, and then we're going to grab a handful of those details and store them in a database. And we're going to drive the whole thing out using test-driven development. I'll kick things off by creating a new Symfony project, and I'll call it Yahoo API, and I'm going to specify version 5.2. So that's installing. Now let's grab some packages that we're going to need from Composer. So Symfony Composer require, so we need HTTP client to make our API requests, Doctrine, Make a bundle, and PHP unit. Now, like I say, we're going to drive the whole thing out with tests. We're going to go for maximum test coverage on this. So the way we'll start out is by writing a test just to get our test environment set up and everything in place for when we start writing code. So here's a test called stock test, and it extends kernel test case, which comes from framework bundle test kernel test case. I'm just going to write a bit of a nonsensical test which will assert that true is true. And what this will do though is it'll pull in all the rest of our dependencies which haven't yet been installed, and it'll just prove to us that what we have so far is all up and running. So over to the terminal, Symfony PHP bin /PHP unit tests /stock test. And as you can see, it's triggered Composer here, which is going to pull in a load of stuff which hasn't yet been installed. And you'll have seen that PHP unit ran and that our test passed. Now what I'm doing is I'm setting up an in-memory SQLite test database. So I grab the SQLite line from .env, I paste it into .env test, and I replace this file path with :memory:. Now using an in-memory test database like we're doing here has loads of benefits. For us, one of the main things is it gets us up and running quickly, and it's very fast and lightweight. I almost always start out with this setup where I can get away with it. Our next step is to grab a bundle which it will return our database to its previous state once the tests have run, so there's no hangover, no leftovers after we've run our tests. This is the command. I'll leave a link to the docs down below so you can copy that. It says, do you want to execute the recipe? Just choose P like I did. Then next we need to enable it as a PHP unit extension or listener. So you should be using 7.5 or higher like me. So grab the extensions tab, go over to phpunit.xml.dist and just paste it in here. I'm just pasting it above listeners. Our third and final setup step is to be able to migrate our database when we run the test each time. Because our database is in memory, we can't pre-migrate. So this guy Andrew has kindly posted this database primer, which is, I've used it for a couple of years. It's absolutely brilliant, does the job. And I'll also leave a link to that down below. The way we do it is this: create a database primer class inside the test folder, and then just cut and paste that code into here. So I'll copy my use statement for the kernel interface. The way it works is this: it checks that we're in the test environment. If not, it throws an exception, because you don't want to be doing this on a dev or production database. The way this works is it looks at all your entity metadata from your annotations, and then using the schema tool, it uses that metadata to update the schema. So make sure you've pulled in the schema tool also in your use statement. And then now we need to prime our database in the setup function of our test class. So kernel equals self boot kernel, and then you just call database primer prime, and you pass in the kernel as the lone argument. We're going to need some entity manager methods, so let's add the entity manager to our test. So private entity manager, and then we'll also create this in our setup method. So the way we do that is this entity manager equals kernel get container get, and then pass in the string doctrine, and then just call get manager on the end of all that, and you'll have an entity manager. Okay, let's go over and run our tests and see where we're up to. Okay, no errors, so everything's running okay. The only thing is we're getting this deprecation notice. So sometimes in your tests you will get deprecation notices. Here's a way to silent them. Inside the PHP tags of our PHP unit XML file, just add an environment variable, Symfony deprecations helper, all uppercase with underscores, and I just use a value of disabled. I've seen other values used. I'll be totally straight with you, I just want them to go away. I'm not too concerned with the underlying functionality that makes them go away. The good news is we now have a fast, lightweight, flexible, in-memory SQLite test database which rolls back to its previous state at the end of each test. So give yourself a pat on the back, that's the boring stuff out of the way. Now let's start having some fun. We're going to write our first test, so all functionality that we do is going to be driven out with tests. We write the test first, and then we write code, or just enough code to make those tests pass. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to break in gently. If you might not have done TDD before, so we'll just test that a stock record can be created in the database. Our tests will all follow this format: set up, do something, make assertions. So these are the fields that we're going to need. They're all going to come direct from the API except for this last one, price change, which we're going to calculate ourselves as price minus previous close. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need is a stock. So we'll create that first. Obviously there's no such thing as a stock in our code just yet. Our tests are going to tell us exactly what code we need to write, and we're not going to write a single line of code that we don't need. We're going to set our properties using typical entity camel case setters. So set symbol, we're going to be using Amazon, which is AMZN. I'll fly through the rest of these because you don't want to watch me doing all these. I'm sure you'll get bored of that. So we have symbol, short name, currency, exchange name, region. For the price change, we're going to need variables because we need to calculate price minus previous close. So the way we'll do that is we create the variables, do the maths, and then set the values afterwards. And so what we'll be looking for here is a price change of minus 100. Just doing it that way to make sure that our database is also handling negatives as well as positives. So covering off these last three: stock, set price, set previous close, set price change. Once we've done that, what we need to do is persist this in the database, and we do that using this entity manager. I'm going to actually add a doc block here so I'll get a bit of code completion. So we'll just put entity manager interface, and we're saying this entity manager persist. Now this doesn't actually persist anything in the database at the moment, it just brings it under the entity manager's management. We persist it when we call this entity manager flush, and that is really our action. That's the act part of our test, or the inverted commas do something, as we've decided to call it. Now we need to grab a stock repository, and we do that with this entity manager get repository, and we pass in the class name of our stock entity. And the reason we're grabbing the repository is because we want to query the database to see what has been persisted there, and so we can perform assertions against it. So because the database gets rolled back at the end of all the tests, there should only be one record in there, so we're just looking for one stock record with a symbol of AMZN. We'll finish off this test by just writing some assertions to make sure that every single field is being set correctly, And what I'd advise in your code is that you always have at least one test which checks that every single field is being set correctly, because things change, and if you don't have that safety net there, you could break other parts of your code. Having maximum test coverage is by far the quickest and easiest way to check whether something has broke. Let's run our test now and see what we discover. Okay, error. Class app tests stock not found. This is good. This is what we expected, and it's actually what we wanted. PHP unit is now telling us exactly what we need to do, which is only a good thing. So let's actually create that entity. Symfony console make : entity stock. So let's add our fields. Luckily I've got them written in front of me. We need symbol, that can be a length of 4 as in AMZN. We need currency, that's going to be USD in our case, so that can be a string, 3 characters. Exchange name, that is also a string, and that can be 30 characters. Price, so for this, if you put a question mark, it shows you what fields are available. We're going to choose decimal. If you're using financials, decimal is better than floats, it's more precise. Leave the default precision, choose a scale of 2. Price change, exactly the same as what we did for price, so it'll be decimal, 10 precision, scale 2. We'll allow it to be nullable. Previous close, same as for price change, decimal, precision of 10, scale of 2. That can also be nullable. Region, this is going to be a string 3. Short name, string also, let's go with 30. That can also be nullable. And we'll just hit enter again, and that completes the process. So here's our stock entity that process generates for us, and here's all our getters and setters, which hopefully should match the ones we've created. Change stock to use app entity stock. So if you check out the top of my file, I'm using app entity stock. Let's run the test. We have an error, undefined variable price change on line 38. Yep, no idea what I was doing there. It should be price minus previous close. So that's fixed. Let's go and run the tests again. And we have green, 1 test, 7 assertions. Excellent. Let's change something for a little sanity check. That good. That breaks. Probably not the best example. Let's go and break one of our assertions. So instead of minus 100, we'll make this minus 101. Excellent. Failed asserting that minus 100 matches minus 101, but it got to that point, meaning all the other previous tests had passed. So that seems like a pretty good place to take a pause. In the next one, we'll finally fire up HttpClient and we'll test the whole process of pinging an API, getting a response, and validating and storing the data in the database. If you found this recording useful, be sure to give it a like, and don't hesitate to share if you want to help others like yourself. Help each other out, that's what this channel is all about. And also, if you want to continue to learn Symfony and other related technology with me, all you need to do is subscribe and click the little notification icon. I release new material 2 times a week, and details of my schedule can be found on the discussion tab of my YouTube homepage.